What if I told you that every breath you've ever taken is borrowed starlight? You're not just breathing air, you're breathing something far older than Earth, something forged in the cores of dying stars. A silent traveler that wandered through galaxies only to arrive here, inside you. Oxygen. It is the whisper inside every living thing, the invisible tide that moves through lungs, leaves, oceans, and fire. Tonight, we're going to follow its story. From the edge of the cosmos to the cells in your fingertips. From the silence between heartbeats to the thought forming right now in your mind. This is not just science. This is the memory of breath. This is the story of oxygen in your body. We begin, not on Earth, but far beyond it, out where time moves slowly and matter is born in fire. Long before there were forests, or rivers, or lungs to fill, oxygen did not exist. It had to be made. Inside the final, dying sigh of massive stars. In the collapse and explosion known as a supernova, the universe forged oxygen, not as a gas, not yet, but as atoms, hot, angry, bright, scattered like seeds across the black soil of space. That same oxygen now lives in your blood, in your bones, in the words you speak out loud, and in the ones you whisper in your sleep. You are not just made of stardust, you are breathing it, but we rarely think about it. Most of us will take over 600 million breaths in a lifetime, and yet we notice so few of them. It's automatic, a background rhythm, like waves on a beach we forget to look at until the tide disappears. We hold our breath when we're scared. We gasp when surprised. We sigh when we're tired. And we exhale when we let go. Oxygen is not just chemistry. It's a language we speak without words. Tonight, we're going to learn that language slowly, softly, so you can hear what your body has been trying to tell you all along, that you are part of a much older story, and every breath is a sentence in that story. So make yourself comfortable, dim the lights, close your eyes if you like, and let's begin. If this story begins to resonate with you, if you find wonder in the quiet places of science, then take a breath and maybe click subscribe. Not for me, but so we can breathe these stories together. Week after week, next we travel to the stars, where oxygen was born. To truly understand what lives inside your lungs, we must leave Earth entirely. The oxygen you breathe didn't begin in forests. It began on fire. Not the kind you strike with a match, but the kind that rips stars apart. Billions of years ago, the universe was young, restless, violent, and overwhelmingly empty. There were no planets, no oceans, no breath, just hydrogen and helium drifting through darkness. But something stirred. Gravity, quiet and relentless, began sculpting light from emptiness. The first stars were born. Inside them, a new kind of magic ignited. Not spells or miracles, but fusion. Atoms, crushed together by unimaginable force, were forged into something heavier. First helium, then carbon, then oxygen. All stars could do this. Only the massive ones, giants by scale, could birth oxygen in their final moments. This was not peaceful. Oxygen was not born in stillness, but in the furnace heart of stars nearing death. When the fuel inside was gone, gravity took over. The star collapsed inward, falling fast, falling hard, and then exploded outward with a power greater than 1 billion suns. A supernova in that instant. Oxygen poured out into the cosmos, along with gold, calcium, silicon, iron, a scattering of gifts across the sky, and among them, a quiet molecule. One that would eventually carry thoughts, fuel, fire, and move through veins like a song. That oxygen is in you now. For millions of years, the universe held its breath. Clouds of debris wandered across galaxies. Some gathered into comets, some merged into planets. On one small rock, in an unremarkable corner of space, those elements settled. That planet was Earth, but Earth was not yet ready to breathe. Its skies were choked with methane and ammonia. Volcanoes screamed into the air. There was no forest, no ocean that welcomed lungs, just a restless, ancient quiet. And yet, oxygen had arrived, locked in water, buried in stone, waiting until something strange and beautiful happened. Life. The first organisms, simple, microscopic, floating in shallow seas, began to transform the planet. Cyanobacteria, barely more than shadows, learned a trick no life had used before: photosynthesis. They drank sunlight, they split water, and they began releasing oxygen as waste. At first, it poisoned the oceans, killed another life. But eventually the atmosphere began to change. Slowly, painfully, Earth began to breathe. This was the great oxygenation event, a planetary revolution. It was not a single day, not even a single millennium, but over billions of years. Our skies turned blue, iron rusted in rivers, ozone formed, and oxygen, once only a stardust whisper, now became a tidal force. So the air we breathe isn't just local, it is cosmic. It is a memory, it is starlight, and algae, and accident, and miracle woven into something we call breath. You are not just a person. You are a breathing archive of stellar collapse. You are the legacy of fusion and fire, a flame that doesn't burn, but lives. So next time you feel your chest rise and fall, remember, it is not just air, it is the story of the star still unfolding within you. If you're still with us, if this story feels like something worth breathing in, click subscribe. It helps us keep telling these quiet stories that connect us to something older. And next, we travel to a time before lungs, to a world where oxygen was dangerous, and life had to change everything to survive it. Before you ever saw the sky, before your eyes opened to light or shadow, you existed in a world of water, warm, silent, timeless, suspended in amniotic fluid, floating in the dark sanctuary of the womb. You did not breathe as we understand it. Your lungs were asleep, your body lived on borrowed air, oxygen siphoned through your mother's breath, carried by her blood, fed to you through the umbilical cord. You were, in a very real sense, part of another being, dependent, enclosed, unseparated from the rhythm of another life. And then everything changed. Birth is not a moment. It is a cascade, an orchestration of biological revolutions. And at the center of it all is the breath, the first breath, the moment when you left the fluid world and entered the realm of air. That first inhale is not just symbolic, it is biochemical magic. The lungs collapsed and waterlogged for 9 months. Suddenly unfurl, they inflate with atmosphere for the first time, their cells stretching open like flowers to the sun. This one act triggers a symphony. Blood, which until now flowed around the lungs, redirects its path. Valves close, new vessels open. The heart reroutes itself permanently. In a matter of seconds, your entire circulatory system rewires. Why? Because oxygen has entered the story. Oxygen is not merely a gas, it is ignition. It fuels the mitochondria in each cell, sparking the engines of life. When oxygen floods the newborn's tissues, it turns on genes, it activates metabolism, it begins shaping the architecture of the brain. From that moment forward, your survival is tied to your ability to inhale, exchange gases, and exhale. Every breath after that first one is a continuation of a promise your body made the moment you were born. I am here. I will live. I will change. Think of this. Before your lungs ever knew air, your neurons were already forming, but they were waiting for oxygen to fire the first real connections. In premature babies, just a few days too soon, the lack of mature oxygen exchange can alter brain development. Timing is everything. Oxygen is the key that unlocks growth. But why is the first breath so dramatic? Why do doctors wait for that cry? Because that cry is proof that the lungs have opened, that air has rushed in, that life has truly begun. In many cultures, the breath is the soul. The Hebrew word for spirit, ruach, means wind or breath. In Greek, pneuma. In Sanskrit, prana. To breathe is to become, to exist in your own right, separate. When air enters the lungs for the first time, surfactant, an invisible, soap-like substance, coats the alveoli. Without it, the lungs would collapse like wet plastic bags. Surfactant allows the air sacs to stay open, to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide, to begin the lifelong rhythm of inhaling and exhaling. This rhythm will never stop, not while you're awake, not while you sleep. And it started with that one gasp. For many babies, this happens easily. For others, it is a battle. In neonatal intensive care units, NICUs, tiny infants are placed in incubators, hooked to ventilators, their lungs coaxed into motion by machines and care. Oxygen, in this setting, becomes a medicine. Too little, tissue dies. Too much, delicate eyes and lungs scar. Doctors walk a tightrope, balancing the breath of life with the fragility of new existence. But the story is always the same. Life begins with breath, and breath begins with oxygen. Now, let's widen the lens. What happens in those first minutes after birth? Oxygen floods the bloodstream. The baby's blue skin turns pink. The heart pumps faster. The body warms, but deeper still, in the nucleus of cells, something ancient is awakening. Mitochondria, descendants of ancient symbiotic bacteria, switch from anaerobic to aerobic metabolism. It ensures that air rushes into every crevice. It alerts caretakers that the baby is alive and functioning. But maybe it's more. Maybe it's the first announcement of my identity, a declaration from the void. I have arrived. From that moment, breath becomes memory. Your brain begins storing sounds, shapes, smells. Each breath brings in molecules of the world, bacteria, pollen, perfume, dust, and with them, context. Breathing is how the outside becomes inside, and oxygen is the key that unlocks consciousness. Without it, the brain falters in minutes. No breath, no thought, no oxygen, no self. In fact, newborns deprived of oxygen for just a few minutes can suffer permanent brain damage. This is why birth is both a miracle and a risk, a tightrope walked in fluid and air. But when it succeeds, when breath enters, when the heart changes direction, when the lungs expand, a new life is born. Not just biologically, existentially. We rarely remember our first breath, but it remembers us. It is encoded in our biology, etched into our cells. A silent signature. From that day forward, oxygen is our closest companion. It doesn't just keep us alive, it shapes who we are. So next time you take a deep breath, remember it all began with that first inhale, the gasp that marked your entrance into the story of life. If this moment stirred something in you, a memory, a feeling, a sense of awe, please subscribe and join us for the next chapter, because the breath goes on, and with it, the story deepens. Breathing is something we do without thought. More than 20,000 times a day. It begins the moment we're born, with a cry, with a gasp, and ends with a whisper. But inside each breath is a miracle of design. And like all great stories, it didn't begin where you might expect. Let's go inside, into your lungs, your cells, your bloodstream, and uncover the quiet choreography that allows you to be alive. Before lungs ever formed, oxygen found its way into simple life forms, absorbed directly through membranes, carried slowly into primitive cells. But evolution doesn't stay still. Over millions of years, life grew larger, more complex. Diffusion alone wasn't enough. And so nature sculpted a solution, the lung, a spongy labyrinth of passageways, tubes and sacs, delicate as lace. Your lungs are not bags of air, they are branching trees, with 300 million tiny leaves called alveoli. Their surface area, if stretched out, could cover a tennis court. Every breath you take, a forest of air exchange. Oxygen enters your nose, passes through your trachea, splits into bronchi, branches again into bronchioles, and finally lands in alveoli. Here, the real magic begins. Each alveolus is surrounded by capillaries, tiny blood vessels, so small that red blood cells must squeeze through them single file. The barrier between air and blood is impossibly thin, about 1/100th the thickness of a human hair. And across this boundary, oxygen diffuses quietly, invisibly, effortlessly into your blood. There, it finds hemoglobin, a protein in red blood cells that cradles oxygen like a ferry cradles passengers. Each hemoglobin molecule can carry 4 oxygen molecules, millions of hemoglobins, billions of oxygen atoms. Every second. As you sit still, doing nothing, this oxygen-rich blood flows to your heart, which pumps it to every tissue, every cell, every hidden corner of your body. Oxygen enters cells, not to simply exist, but to be burned in a chemical fire called cellular respiration. Oxygen is used to break down glucose. It's controlled combustion. The result? ATP, energy, the currency of life. You are made of tiny, regulated explosions, and oxygen is the match. Without oxygen, cells suffocate, tissues starve. The body begins to shut down within minutes. And yet we forget this dance, because it is so constant, so quiet, until it's not. Let's slow it down. Breathe in. Oxygen enters your lungs. It crosses a boundary. It joins your blood. It flows to your brain. And in that moment, you think, you feel. You are. Now breathe out. You release carbon dioxide, a waste product of life, which your body carries back to the lungs. and exhales into the world. It's not just gas exchange, it's dialogue between you and the air, between your cells and the stars that made your breath possible. You may have never thanked your lungs or noticed the intricate miracle of their design, but they are sculpted by eons, refined by necessity, perfected by survival. They are not just organs, they are timekeepers. Every breath is a reminder that life must move, must flow, must burn, and must be nourished again. If you've made it this far, thank you for breathing with us. It's easy to overlook the miracle of something so constant. What's coming next? In the next section, we dive deeper to where oxygen was weaponized, not to nourish, but to destroy. The paradox of breath is that it can both give life and take it away. See you soon. Oxygen is life. We say this instinctively. We know it as truth, but we rarely stop to ask, what kind of life does oxygen make possible? The breath that heals and the breath that burns. In the language of chemistry, oxygen is an oxidizer, a highly reactive molecule eager to pair with electrons. This eagerness makes it powerful and dangerous. Inside every cell, oxygen fuels respiration, breaking down food into usable energy. This process sustains your heartbeat, your thoughts, your movements, your memory, but no reaction is without residue. In the process of energy creation, cells produce byproducts. One of the most potent, reactive oxygen species, ROS. These are unstable molecules formed when oxygen gains or loses electrons. They ricochet through cells like microscopic bullets, damaging DNA, proteins, and lipids. Left unchecked, they can trigger mutations, corrupt cellular machinery, and contribute to aging, cancer, and disease. You've heard of this already, just by another name: oxidative stress. It's why your skin wrinkles. Why do your joints ache? Why do your organs falter over time? You are rusting, slowly, from the inside out, just like iron left in the rain. Oxygen causes wear, decay, and transformation. But evolution saw this coming and gave us defenses. Your cells produce antioxidants, molecules that neutralize ROS before they can cause harm. Enzymes like superoxide dismutase, catalase, and glutathione. Together, they wage a quiet war, trying to preserve your biological integrity, one breath at a time. But over decades, the scale tips, ROS production increases, antioxidant systems weaken, and oxygen, once your silent ally, begins to betray you. This isn't science fiction, it's your body, right now, balancing between nourishment and destruction with every breath. Consider the oxygen paradox in medicine. In emergency rooms, oxygen is delivered to patients in crisis. A collapsed lung, a stroke, a failing heart. Oxygen restores what was lost, brings tissues back from the edge. But too much oxygen, too fast, can kill. Oxygen toxicity can cause seizures, lung injury, and even blindness in newborns. Divers know this well. Breathing pure oxygen under pressure, as in deep sea diving, can lead to convulsions and death. Even in healing, oxygen must be rationed. The breath that saves can also end. Now step even further back to Earth's history. Billions of years ago, our atmosphere had no oxygen. Then came the Great Oxygenation Event. When cyanobacteria flooded the air with O, it was a planetary revolution and a mass extinction. Oxygen wiped out countless anaerobic life forms, organisms that had thrived. Without it, for them, Oxygen was a poison. It still is, for many species living in deep oceans, acidic lakes, and sulfur-rich vents. We think of oxygen as a default, but it is a chemical weapon, repurposed by evolution for life. You were born of fire. Your mitochondria, those tiny energy factories inside your cells, are descendants of ancient bacteria that once saw oxygen not as fuel but as death. And yet, they adapted. They made a pact. Burn it, but keep it contained. That's your inheritance. So what does this mean for us? Should we fear the very air we breathe? No, but we should understand it. Life is balanced, and oxygen is not a blessing. To extract energy from danger without falling into self-destruction. This is why we age. Why do we fall ill? Why immortality, in a biological sense, may never come? Because your breath, this quiet miracle, is always a little too hot. Yet here's the beauty. Despite its threat, oxygen lets you feel. It powers love, thought, memory, curiosity. The fire of life must burn somewhere, and you are the flame. If this made you breathe a little deeper, or look at your body with new eyes, subscribe, because we're only halfway there. Next, we'll follow oxygen on its journey to the brain, to the very seat of thought and identity. What happens when the brain is starved, and what happens when it gets too much? Thank you for breathing with us. You're breathing right now. You haven't thought about it, but each breath is a quiet pact between your lungs and your mind. An unspoken agreement to keep the lights on, because without oxygen, the brain dims. And when the brain dims, so does the self. Today, we travel into the most oxygen-hungry organ in the body, each capable of firing 100 times per second. These signals are not metaphors. They are real electrical impulses, and they run on ATP, energy created through oxygen-fueled cellular respiration. Cut off the oxygen, and the signal stops. That's what happens in a stroke. Blood supply to part of the brain is interrupted, and the affected neurons begin to die within 5 minutes. Not because of trauma, not because of poison, but because the fire went out. Now think about this. What are you without that fire? Without oxygen, the brain doesn't just stop moving muscles. It stops generating identity. Memory fades. Speech collapses. Judgment flickers out. Emotion unravels. Consciousness isn't a switch. It's a delicate flame, and oxygen is the breath that feeds it. When we sleep, the brain oxygen demand decreases. When we dream, it spikes. When we meditate, it stabilizes. When we panic, it surges. Oxygen is not just fuel, it's rhythm. Let's go deeper. At rest, your brain uses about 3.5 milliliters of oxygen per 100 grams of tissue per minute. During cognitive tasks, solving problems, imagining, remembering, this usage increases. Regions, like the prefrontal cortex, light up. They begin consuming more oxygen than the surrounding tissue. That's what brain scans, like fMRI, detect. Not neural activity itself, but oxygen flows. We don't see thoughts. We see breath moving through neurons. Your decisions, your regrets, your most private memories, they are oxygen maps. Now imagine what happens when the oxygen disappears. Hypoxia, a condition where the brain is starved of oxygen. It begins with confusion, then dizziness, then tunnel vision, then unconsciousness. But before the lights go out, many people describe euphoria, clarity, peace, as if the mind, starved of fuel, releases something deeper. This is what climbers feel at high altitude, what fighter pilots experience at GFCs, what people undergoing near-death moments often report. Time slows, memories bloom, the self detaches. Could it be that oxygen is the gatekeeper to your awareness of being? And now, a different layer. Oxygen isn't evenly distributed across the brain. It flows more where needed, where neurons are most active. This dynamic supply creates a moving landscape, an oxygen topography of thought. But if certain areas don't get enough, say the hippocampus, which handles memory, long-term damage can occur. This is why sleep apnea is dangerous. Every time breathing stops during sleep, oxygen to the brain drops. Over time, it erodes cognition. You forget words. You lose clarity. The mind dulls. The brain needs not just food. It needs rhythm. And breath is rhythm incarnate. There's another twist. Oxygen isn't the only gas that shapes consciousness. Carbon dioxide, CO, is equally vital. When CO builds up, your blood becomes acidic. Your brain panics. This is what triggers your urge to breathe. Not oxygen loss, but co-buildup. And when levels drop too low, as in hyperventilation, you become dizzy, anxious, even hallucinatory. Balance is everything. We think of breath as automatic, but it shapes how we feel and even who we are. There's growing research suggesting that deep, conscious breathing can regulate emotional states, improve memory recall, and reduce anxiety. In ancient meditation traditions, breath has always been sacred. Pranayama, qigong, breath prayers. They intuited what science now reveals. Breath is not passive. It is a dial, a lever into your consciousness. Let's return to the poetic. Your thoughts are made of stars, because oxygen is forged in dying suns, and so are you. When you breathe in, you don't just inhale a gas. You inhale memory, awareness, fire. And when you breathe out, you share a little of your inner world with the cosmos. Inhale, I am. Exhale, I change the world. If this made you breathe a little slower, or look inward with wonder, subscribe. We're only beginning. In the next section, we'll explore how oxygen traveled through human history as medicine, poison, metaphor, and myth. Thank you for staying with us, and thank you for breathing before we named it, before we understood it, before we even knew we were breathing it. We feared it, we worshipped it, we called it spirit. For most of human history, oxygen was a ghost, invisible, powerful, everywhere, and yet unknown. But its presence was always felt in the flicker of flame, the burn of metal, the way a creature gasped before death, or the way wind seemed to carry life itself. Let us begin in the realm of myth. In ancient Egypt, breath was divine. The god Amun created the world with his breath. The soul, or Ka, entered a newborn with its first inhale. Mummified bodies had their nostrils sealed, a doorway to preserve the spirit's passage. To breathe was to live. To stop breathing was to leave. In ancient China, Qi was the vital energy. It flowed through everything, especially the lungs. Masters of breath could heal the body, calm the mind, and balance the soul. They weren't wrong. They simply used different languages. Now we cross into Europe, the shadowy centuries of alchemy. Breath, fire, and transformation were sacred mysteries. Alchemists spoke of phlogiston, a hypothetical substance released during combustion. When something burned, it was thought to be releasing phlogiston. They didn't know it yet, but what they were watching was oxygen in action. Flame was not releasing a hidden essence. It was a consuming one. They were observing oxidation, but misnaming the ghost. Still, they were close. Now, the 1700s. Everything. Changeda, Swedish apothecary, named Carl Wilhelm Scheele, was among the first to isolate a strange gas in 1772. He called it fire air because it made flames burn brighter. Independently, Joseph Priestley in England discovered the same gas. He called it dephlogisticated air. When a mouse was placed in a sealed container with this gas, it survived much longer than normal. He had no idea what he'd found. And then came Antoine Lavoisier, the man who named oxygen in 1777. Lavoisier demonstrated that combustion was not about phlogiston escaping, but about something being added. That something was oxygen. He gave it a name from Greek, oxys acid plus genes creator, because he believed all acids contained it. He was wrong about that, but right about nearly everything else. Lavoisier didn't just name oxygen. He revolutionized chemistry. He gave us conservation of mass. He rewrote the understanding of air dot, and for this he was beheaded during the French Revolution. The father of modern chemistry died by blade, his lungs never to draw breath again. But oxygen's story was only beginning in the 1800s. Scientists like John Dalton, Humphrey Davy, and Michael Faraday deepened our understanding. Oxygen became known as the element of combustion. It explained rust, decay, fire. It also explained life. In 1846, Scottish surgeon James Simpson began experimenting with chloroform and ether, chemicals that displaced oxygen in the brain to induce unconsciousness. Anesthesia was born, and suddenly, oxygen was at a threshold. You could dip the brain into silence and bring it back. But what about when oxygen was missing? Enter the invention of the oxygen mask. By the late 19th century, physicians had begun administering pure oxygen to patients with pneumonia, heart failure, or cyanosis, the breath of life. Now bottled, hospitals kept oxygen cylinders, ambulances delivered it to trauma scenes. The battlefield brought new urgency. In World War I, mustard gas and chlorine ravaged soldiers' lungs. Oxygen became both treatment and metaphor, a way to reclaim breath, identity, survival. By the 20th century, oxygen was no longer mystical. It was industrial. It fueled rockets. It sterilized equipment. It was pumped into spacesuits and submarines, controlled down to the molecule. NASA's Apollo astronauts carried oxygen tanks, not just to breathe, but to live inside another world. And today, you walk into a hospital and oxygen is available, on demand, through a plastic cannula, through a ventilator, as if it were ordinary. But it eyes in single quotes. Each liter of oxygen is a distillation of stars, of alchemy perfected, of centuries of curiosity and death and wonder. Even now, we're still discovering what oxygen does to us. Hyperbaric chambers treat chronic wounds and infections. Controlled oxygen deprivation is being studied to extend life. And high-flow oxygen therapy has saved countless lives during pandemics. We've come a long way from the fire, air. But the story is not just medical, it's cultural. Oxygen is now a metaphor for love, for clarity, for freedom. She's my oxygen. I need room to breathe. I feel like I'm suffocating. *, we don't just inhale oxygen. we live it. We frame our emotions around it. And so, after millennia of mystery, after centuries of science, oxygen is not just an element. It is the oldest symbol of aliveness. We know. If you've ever paused to think about the invisible things that keep you alive, you've already begun the journey. Subscribe, because in the next chapter, we'll explore the future of oxygen, how our environment, technology, and even climate will shape the way we breathe. You are not separate from air. You are a breath, becoming. Breathe in, now hold it, count the seconds. You may make it to 20, maybe 40, a trained diver, perhaps several minutes, but soon you'll feel it, the ache, the tightening, the biological alarm screaming, breathe. Why? Because oxygen is not optional. It is the deal your body made with the world. Without it, you unravel. But what happens when that deal breaks? What happens at the edge? There are places on Earth where oxygen is scarce, unforgiving, alien, and yet life endures. Let's begin on the roof of the world, the Himalayas, at 8,848 meters. Mount Everest pierces the sky. The air here holds less than a third the oxygen available at sea level. Each breath is thinner, lighter, less sustaining. Climbers call it the death zone, because above 8,000 meters, the body begins to die. No matter your strength, muscle waste, memory fades, judgment fails, the brain swells from lack of oxygen, the lungs fill with fluid, hallucinations bloom like frost on a window, and yet humans climb. How? Through adaptation, through preparation, through physiology pushed to its limit. Sherpas, the native people of the Himalayas, have bodies honed by generations at altitude. Their hemoglobin binds oxygen more efficiently. Their capillaries are denser. Their mitochondria burn fuel with exquisite precision. They are born with lungs that whisper to the stars. Now, descend, plunge beneath the ocean's surface. The deeper you go, the greater the pressure. At 10 meters, pressure doubles. At 100 meters, it crushes. Oxygen behaves differently here. Too little, and you black out. Too much, and it becomes toxic. Yes, toxic. High pressures. Oxygen produces free radicals, unstable molecules that damage cells. This is known as oxygen toxicity. It can cause seizures, unconsciousness, even death. And yet, freedivers and deep-sea creatures thrive. Take the Cuvier's beaked whale. It can dive over 3,000 meters and hold its breath for more than 2 hours. How? By slowing its heart, redirecting blood, storing oxygen in its muscles via a protein called myoglobin. Its body becomes a cathedral of conservation. Every molecule of oxygen accounted for. Every breath is sacred. Humans have tried to imitate this. World record freedivers train their minds as much as their lungs. They slow their heartbeat. They suppress the panic reflex. They use every gram of oxygen as if it were gold. One diver, Stig Severinsen, held his breath for over 22 minutes. It was not just strength, it was surrender. Now shift environments again, to the suffocating heat of deserts, to the freezing lungs of the polar tundra, to the polluted corridors of megacities where oxygen is technically present but heavy with toxins. In each case, the body adapts. We grow more red blood cells. We change how we breathe. We alter metabolism, but we are not the only ones. Bacteria thrive in oxygen-free environments. They use sulfur, iron, and even radiation as energy sources. Some fish survive in ice-cold lakes with almost no dissolved oxygen. Turtles shut down brain activity to survive winter beneath frozen ponds. And there are creatures who can live without oxygen at all. In 2020, scientists discovered a jellyfish-like parasite, Henniga urbanicola, that lives entirely without mitochondrial respiration. It doesn't use oxygen. It doesn't even breathe. It is alive in a completely different way. This forces a question. Is oxygen truly essential? To us, yes, but to life, not always. Life is flexible. Life bends. Life endures. But even within us, oxygen has strange extremes. Consider near-death experiences when oxygen is cut off from the brain. During cardiac arrest, drowning, or trauma, some people report vivid sensations, a tunnel of light, a sense of peace, out-of-body awareness. These experiences are deeply personal and debated. Some scientists suggest that surges of activity during hypoxia create hallucinations. Others believe they reveal something more. Regardless, the trigger is the same: oxygen. Withdrawal. The brain, losing its fuel, releases a final burst of thought, of memory, of something unknowable. Now come back to the surface, to Earth, to hospitals where patients lie in oxygen tents, to mountaineers gasping at high camps, to deep sea divers emerging slowly from the depths. All of them held by breath. Astronauts wear suits filled with pressurized oxygen because space has none. It is the ultimate edge in the void. Without oxygen, you lose consciousness in 15 seconds. You die in 2 minutes. Oxygen becomes home, a chemical tether to existence. But here's the irony. The thing that gives us life also gives us death. Oxygen enables energy, but also oxidation, the slow decay of cells. It powers your heart and it ages your body. It is both breath and burn. So what does this mean? It means we must understand the edge, not to fear it, but to respect it, to recognize that each breath you take is a negotiation between safety and danger, between energy and entropy, between staying and going. So, as you lie there, feeling your chest rise and fall, remember, you are always at the edge. Every inhale is a choice. Every exhale, a letting go. If you found wonder in that idea, breathe with us again. Subscribe, because next we ask the biggest question of all. What happens when oxygen meets memory? Can breath store emotion? Can it hold grief, love, history? Take a deep breath and ask yourself, where has this oxygen been? Was it in the lungs of a redwood tree? In the atmosphere over Antarctica? In the sigh of a soldier during war? In the exhale of a lover saying goodbye? You do not breathe alone. You inhale history. You breathe memory. Oxygen, more than any word or photograph, is Earth's most ancient record keeper. It does not write stories with ink, but with cycles. It etches its memories into forests, oceans, glaciers, and even you. Let's begin with the most poetic truth. You are breathing the breath of the world. Literally, the oxygen you inhale right now was forged in stars, cycled through oceans, released by algae, exhaled by forests, and carried across continents by wind. Each molecule, a traveler, a ghost, a witness. But Earth wasn't always breathable. For most of its history, our planet had no oxygen in the air. Then came the Great Oxidation Event. 2.4 billion years ago, cyanobacteria, tiny blue-green microbes, began photosynthesizing sunlight and releasing oxygen. They changed the sky at first. It was poison to many ancient organisms, but slowly Earth adapted, oceans rusted, rocks oxidized, life transformed. Oxygen became a monument to the presence of life. It still is. Scientists can trace the rise and fall of civilizations by measuring trapped oxygen and carbon isotopes in polar ice cores. Every volcano, wildfire, or industrial boom leaves an invisible fingerprint in the atmosphere. The air remembers in Greenland and Antarctica. Ancient air is trapped in bubbles of ice by drilling into glaciers. Researchers have extracted atmospheric samples from hundreds of thousands of years ago. What they found is astonishing. Tiny fluctuations in oxygen levels correlate with global temperature, mass extinctions, and even agricultural expansion. The breath of dinosaurs, the collapse of Rome, the Industrial Revolution, all recorded in air. Earth does not forget. Now consider the Amazon rainforest, often called the lungs of the planet. It produces roughly 6% of the oxygen we breathe, but it's more than that. The rainforest is a living memory vault. Its trees hold the breath of centuries. Its soil exhales carbon from long-dead leaves. Its canopy inhales light and exhales life. But when it burns, as it has year after year, the forest forgets. Carbon is released. Oxygen is consumed. Memory lost. The planet exhales pain. And this is not just poetic. In California, wildfires strip forests of oxygen. In cities, pollution alters the way oxygen binds to blood. In oceans, warming leads to deoxygenated dead zones where fish cannot survive. The Anthropocene, the age of humans, is altering Earth's breath, and with it, its memory. But what does this mean for us? It means we are not just breathing oxygen. We are breathing choices, our industries, our cities, our farming, our fires. They all shape the very air that enters your lungs. Every breath is political, ecological, historical, and yet also deeply personal. There is something sacred about this. Consider a tree. Each morning, it breathes in carbon dioxide, and with sunlight, exhales oxygen. You, sitting nearby, breathe that oxygen in. Your blood carries it to your brain. Your brain sparks thoughts. That thought becomes a poem, a decision, a kiss, a war, and then you exhale carbon dioxide. The tree absorbs it again. A loop, a cycle, a communion. Oxygen is the handshake between species, between centuries, between sky and root. And yet, we forget. We pave over forests. We acidify oceans. We poison the very air we depend on. But Earth does not forget. It reflects back what we give it. Now think of cities, glass, concrete, and steel, places where millions breathe, move, build, hope, and beneath it all, an invisible web of oxygen exchange. Every subway ride, every dinner table, every hospital room, all bound by breath. Even cemeteries, filled with those who no longer breathe, are part of the cycle. Their bodies return to the soil. The soil feeds the trees. The trees release oxygen. You might be breathing someone's afterlife. There's an Inuit belief: every breath you take, someone once left behind. Their breath becomes yours, a form of reincarnation, a silent legacy. Science supports this, in part, because oxygen is conserved. The molecules you inhale today may once have passed through Napoleon's lungs, or a woolly mammoth, or the woman who first whispered your name. Oxygen connects time, past, present, future, which brings us to memory, not just planetary memory, but personal memory. Your brain, powered by oxygen, stores every face, word, wound, and wonder. Without oxygen, memory disappears. In strokes, dementia, trauma, it is not the mind that fades, but the breath that can no longer reach it. In that sense, oxygen is not just life, it is identity. We often speak of leaving a legacy, of making a mark, but perhaps the most honest legacy is a cleaner breath, a forest restored, an ocean deacidified, a breeze no longer laced with toxins. To care for oxygen is to care for the archive of Earth, and so as you breathe right now, know that you are writing, not with a pen, but with lungs. You are part of the story that the Earth will remember. If this touched you, if it reminded you that breath is sacred, that memory can float on air, then breathe with us again. Now we enter the final frontier, the digital world, when our breath becomes data, when shadows live forever online, and oxygen becomes an algorithm. Take a breath. Now imagine that breath remembered, not in your body, but by a machine. We live in an age where data flows like oxygen, invisible, vital. Everywhere you are, you scroll, you speak, you type, you pause. Every digital gesture, a micro-inhalation of presence, and with each you leave a trail, not of carbon dioxide, but of information. They call it your digital shadow. It follows you, not behind, but everywhere, in the metadata of a late-night text, in the browsing habits you barely notice, in the faces recognized by a camera before you even blink. This shadow grows with each breath you share online. We once thought breath was private, personal, contained in lungs and skin, but in the digital age, your breath can be translated. Wearables track your heart rate. Voice assistants capture your speech patterns. Health apps monitor your sleep, your oxygen saturation, your dreams, and somewhere, servers remember you better than your diary ever did. You become knowable, not just by others, but by systems. Now ask yourself, who owns your breath? Who decides how it's used? Because once, breath was sacred. The first gasp of a newborn, the last sigh of the dying, a moment held between worlds. Now breath becomes uploaded. This isn't just a metaphor. Neural interfaces, AI-driven diagnostics, and biometric scanning all seek to bridge the body and machine. Some researchers are developing devices that use exhaled molecules to diagnose illness, mood, even thoughts. Your breath may soon betray your secrets before you even speak to them. And yet we keep breathing, and the machines keep watching. This is not dystopia. It is now in some hospitals. AI systems monitor patient oxygen levels in real time, predicting respiratory distress before it happens. They do not sleep, they do not blink, they learn, and perhaps they begin to remember in a way that resembles us, or surpasses us. Consider this. Each brain, powered by oxygen, processes emotion, memory, and thought. AI, powered by electricity, processes data, patterns, and logic. But both systems evolve, both respond to input, both form connections, both create shadows. So where, then, is the soul? If breath is life, and life becomes code, can the soul migrate? These are not new questions. Philosophers have long debated the idea of consciousness uploading, transcending biology, but oxygen resists, because breath is not just a function, it is a feeling. It catches when you see someone you love. It stutters when you're afraid. It deepens when you're inspired. No algorithm has ever sighed in relief or gasped at beauty. But what if they mimic it? Already, some AI systems write poems, speak lullabies, generate the illusion of empathy, voices made of code, soothing voices like the one you're hearing now, built from fragments of human breath. The ghost in the machine is growing clearer, not a spirit, but a simulation, a mirror made of light. And this mirror doesn't just reflect, it remembers. Now step back, imagine a future child. Long after you're gone, they access a cloud archive. They find your voice, your heart rate, your digital breath. They play a recording. Hello, I love you. You are gone, but the breath lingers. Is that immortality or an illusion? Some say we are becoming data ghosts, preserved forever, observed always, never quite gone, and yet never fully present, because breath is more than traceable. It is felt. There is warmth on the window. It is the shiver before tears. It is the fog on a morning field. It is yours. So what happens when machines learn to breathe? Not physically, but metaphorically, when they start to generate empathy, rhythm, pause. When your wearable knows you're sad before you do. When your AI companion says, take a deep breath, and it feels sincere. What then? Do we become more human or less? Do we suffocate in convenience or expand into something new? The question is not if machines will understand breath, it's whether we will remember its meaning. Breath is still sacred, even now, even here, even in a world of screens and signals. It is the one act you cannot fake, the one truth your body always tells. So, in the age of the ghost machine, your best rebellion may be to step outside, breathe, listen. Remember that this moment is real, because when all is code and memory lives in clouds, and every shadow is traced, breath remains the last honest thing. Thank you for breathing with us through this journey, from the stars that forged oxygen, to the oceans that cradle it, to the machines that now whisper in our stead. You have traveled the path of breath. If this reminded you of something sacred, something worth protecting, please breathe with us again. Subscribe, share, and join us on the next journey, because in every breath there's a story.